On the morning of September 3rd, 2002, the residents of Hallowind Acres woke to find something deeply wrong. The entire Culver family, Greg, Lillian, and their 2 children, were gone. Their cars sat untouched in the driveway, the front door was locked from the inside, and breakfast had been left half-eaten on the dining room table. The porch light flickered faintly, as it always did. The mailbox still held yesterday's mail, and the family dog, Baxter, was found wandering alone inside the fenced backyard, barking endlessly at the forest beyond the property line. But this was no ordinary disappearance. Within the next 6 days, 2 more families from Hallowind vanished in eerily similar fashion. No signs of struggle, no messages, no demands. One house still had the television on, paused on a children's cartoon. Another had a birthday cake, left on the counter with 5 unlit candles. The town spiraled into panic. Rumors of underground tunnels, abandoned military bunkers, and secret experiments began to circulate. Then, suddenly, the disappearances stopped. For the next 20 years, no clues surfaced, no bodies, no explanations, not a single trace, until one rainy afternoon in 2022, when an anonymous package arrived at the county police department. Inside was an unlabeled VHS tape. When played, it revealed a single, shaky shot. A figure standing at the edge of the forest near Hallowind Acres, and behind them, briefly visible between the trees, was someone thought to have vanished in 2002. Back to Storiosity's videos. The package arrived without a return address. A plain cardboard box, soaked at the corners from the morning rain, was dropped at the front desk of the Marlow County Sheriff's Department. Deputy Lisa Armand, the only officer on duty that Sunday morning, noticed it because of how out of place it seemed. No name, no postage, no markings other than the word watch scrawled in uneven black ink across the lid. She set her coffee down and pulled the tape from inside an old VHS cassette, dusty and brittle with age. Attached to it was a yellowing post-it note with just one line: "Play it before sunset." The department didn't even have a VCR anymore. Lisa had to borrow one from the local library across the street, dragging it back through the rain under her coat. She hooked it up in the small conference room, closed the blinds, and pressed play. The screen crackled to life with static, then settled into a grainy image. It showed a stretch of woods, unmistakably the edge of the Hawthorne Trail near Hallowind Acres, familiar to anyone who had grown up in town. The footage was shaky, as if shot from a handheld camera, and completely silent. A solitary figure stood at the edge of the tree line. No movement, just staring. Then something flickered behind them. Lisa leaned closer to the screen. For less than 2 seconds, the camera caught a glimpse of a face just behind the figure, half hidden by trees. It was quick, but chillingly clear. She froze. She knew that face. It belonged to Jeremy Culver, the youngest member of the Culver family. He had been 7 when he disappeared in 2002. 20 years later, he hadn't aged a day. Her fingers hovered above the remote, unsure whether to rewind or run. The tape cut to black. She sat back in the chair, her breath shallow. There was no time code, no indication of when the footage had been taken. But the way the woods looked, the placement of the fallen log, the overgrown path was current, recent. That spot was just half a mile from where the last known search party had turned back in the spring of 2003. It had been sealed off since. Now, sitting there in the quiet office with only the rain ticking against the window, Lisa realized something terrible. Someone had been keeping an eye on the forest all these years, and someone or something was still out there. Deputy Lisa Armand. We played the tape 3 more times, slowing it down each time she saw the flicker of Jeremy's face in the background. The resolution was poor, but the details were there: his distinctive auburn hair, the birthmark on his left cheek, even the same red hoodie he had been wearing the day the Culver family disappeared. No digital artifact could fake that. She paused. The frame again, frozen on that blink and miss moment between the trees. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking through it, as if he knew someone was watching, as if he had been waiting. By early afternoon, Lisa had secured the tape in an evidence locker and locked the VCR in the trunk of her cruiser. She didn't alert anyone yet, not even the sheriff, not until she could verify what she was seeing. Her first stop was the county archives office, where physical records of the missing persons cases from 2002 were stored. She flipped through faded photos, witness statements, aerial maps from the original search. Jeremy Culver's file included a photograph taken the week before he vanished. Holding it side by side with the image from the tape, her stomach dropped. It was exactly the same. No aging, no change. She drove to the outskirts of Hallowind Acres, where the cul-de-sac of the Culver home sat hidden behind a chain-linked fence and overgrown with ivy and neglect. Signs posted along the fence warned of unstable ground and trespassing penalties. The neighborhood had been condemned in 2004 after 2 additional disappearances: the Levinsons and the Grant twins turned public fear into hysteria. Hallowind Acres wasn't just haunted by rumors. It had become a wound the county refused to reopen. Yet now, Lisa stood at the rusted gate, staring into the stillness beyond. The path into the woods was visible from where she stood. Trees bent inwards at odd angles, creating a natural tunnel that looked as though it had been intentionally formed. The same log from the tape, thick, moss-covered, and angled across the path, was right where the camera had captured it. This was the place. And whatever had happened 20 years ago hadn't stayed buried. The air around her was heavy, still. There were no birds, no insects. Just silence, thick and watching. Lisa's radio buzzed suddenly, jolting her from her trance. Unit 4, this is dispatch. We've received an anonymous voicemail. Claims there's something waiting in the trees behind the Grant property. The timing was too exact to be coincidence. Lisa's eyes followed the trail beyond the gate, where the trees grew darker and closer together. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in patterns, and this one was waking up after a long, patient sleep. Lisa returned to the station just before dusk, her cruiser trailing mud from the perimeter of Hallowind Acres. The moment she stepped through the door, dispatch clerk Jonah Miles waved her over with an urgency that instantly made her stomach tighten. "You need to hear this," he said, gesturing toward the old landline machine beside his desk. The red light blinked slowly, a signal that one message remained unplayed. He clicked the button and stepped back. The recording began with static, then a slow, raspy inhale. "I saw him. I saw the boy in the red hoodie." The voice was genderless, possibly distorted, but calm. Too calm. He came to the edge of the trail again, same place near the Grant's fence. He never talks, just stands there. "I've been watching him for weeks now. He looks the same every time." The message paused for a heartbeat, then continued. "He doesn't blink, doesn't breathe. And yesterday, I counted 2 more behind him. One was Lillian Culver." Lisa exchanged a glance with Jonah. The name chilled the room. Lillian Culver, Jeremy's mother, had been 38 when she vanished. The recording continued. "I know they're not alive, but they're not gone either. It's like the forest is keeping them, holding them just out of reach. I think They're waiting for something, and I think it's close. The tape clicked off. Lisa stood frozen. The timing was too aligned with the VHS package. She couldn't shake the thought that this caller wasn't just an observer. They might be a link between past and present. She turned to Jonah. Was this call traceable? No number, no caller ID. Came in from an unlisted line, he replied. But it came through the old Eastern Tower. That signal only pings if you're somewhere near the power grid by the woods. The same area the original search teams lost radio contact 2 decades ago. Lisa stared out the window, where the last of the sunlight was fading behind the trees. The Eastern Tower wasn't just close to Hallowind Acres. It was nearly within walking distance of the condemned Grant property that Forrest had always been. Treated like a sealed vault, something you never disturbed. But it wasn't sealed anymore. She pulled her field notebook from her jacket and flipped it open. She had a growing list now. The VHS tape, the unaged face of Jeremy Culver, a new eyewitness account, and a location that was starting to draw everything back into focus. It wasn't just one event. It was a rhythm, a pattern reawakening. And Lisa feared the next beat was coming. Early the next morning, Lisa stood beneath the rusted frame of the old Eastern radio tower. It rose from the trees like a relic of another world, surrounded by knee-high weeds and collapsed fencing. The hum of dormant electricity echoed faintly. In the air, although the tower had reportedly been offline for years, her breath fogged lightly in the cool air as she checked the receiver slung over her shoulder. She had borrowed the analog signal scanner from the county emergency kit. It was outdated, heavy and barely functional, but it had one strength. It could pick up stray analog frequencies, even from blocked or scrambled sources. As she circled the base of the tower, the scanner beeped softly. A faint signal came through, so faint she nearly missed it. It wasn't a voice, not at first. It was static, layered with something stranger. A low, rhythmic pulse. A kind of repeating throb, like a heartbeat muffled behind a wall. Then, mixed into that distortion, came a fragment of a child's voice. "Can anyone hear me?" The voice was high and trembling. "Male, I think we're still here." The transmission cut out instantly after. Lisa froze, staring at the scanner's flickering light. It wasn't a recording. The signal had been live. Someone or something had just spoken from within the restricted zone. And that voice, timid and filled with confusion, matched what she remembered from Jeremy Culver's old home videos. She knelt in the dirt, adjusting the scanner's dial. There was no return signal, just silence. But the fact that something had broadcast from a tower that wasn't even supposed to be operational sent a wave of dread through her. This wasn't folklore. This wasn't hysteria or small-town rumor. It was real. And the people who vanished, at least some of them, might still be out there. Back at her cruiser, Lisa spread out the map of the county and circled 3 points. The Culver residence, the Eastern radio tower, and the trailhead near the Grant property. When connected, the points formed a near-perfect triangle, with the dense forest sitting squarely in the middle. A location no one had dared to search. Since the final missing persons case in late 2003, she began to understand. This triangle wasn't just coincidence. It was a perimeter, a boundary line. Inside that line, something had been watching, and, waiting. By late afternoon, Lisa had made a decision. She filed a formal request to re-enter the restricted trail zone, citing potential evidence linked to an open cold case. She didn't wait for approval. She folded the form into her coat pocket and headed back toward Hallowind Acres, flashlight in hand. Whatever was in those woods had waited 20 years for someone to come looking again. This time, someone would. Lisa returned to the perimeter fence just as dusk began to settle in, casting long, warped shadows over the tangle of trees that bordered the old Culver property. The gate creaked open under her hand with surprising ease to eerily. The lock that had once sealed it had been cut, the chain left coiled in the grass like a discarded snake. She didn't know whether it was broken recently or years ago, but it confirmed one thing. Someone else had been here recently. Maybe the same person who left the tape. Maybe someone watching from the other side. The trail was even more overgrown than she remembered. Thick underbrush pressed in from both sides, and the trees formed a tunnel above her that filtered out what little light remained. She moved carefully, sweeping her flashlight from side to side. Every so often, she'd see things that didn't belong: an old mitten half buried in mud, a child's shoe, a broken camera lens. Time hadn't erased these objects. It had simply hidden them beneath moss and silence. These were artifacts, leftovers of people who had once walked this path and never returned. She stopped at a clearing where the trees opened into a shallow basin, and the ground felt oddly soft beneath her boots. Her scanner gave a brief pulse. One quick beep, then nothing. She knelt down and brushed aside the wet leaves, uncovering a square panel of warped metal embedded in the earth. It looked like a hatch. There were no handles, just a thin groove outlining the square, barely visible unless you were looking for it. It hadn't rusted naturally. It had been placed here, hidden. Suddenly, her flashlight dimmed for half a second, the beam flickering as if the batteries had hiccuped. Lisa stood, every nerve in her body on alert. The forest had gone quiet again. That unnatural kind of quiet that seemed to listen rather than sleep. She heard it, then barely a whisper, but it was there, a voice calling faintly through the trees. Lisa. She whipped around, shining the light into the woods. Nothing but the voice, childlike, uncertain, and eerily familiar, drifted through again. "Can you help us?" Her mouth went dry. She hadn't told anyone she was coming here, and no one should have known her name. Her grip tightened around the flashlight as she stepped away from the hatch. Whatever was buried here wasn't done, and whoever had spoken from the woods was still nearby, watching, reaching out, for the first time. Lisa felt it fully. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was an invitation. Lisa stood motionless for nearly a full minute, listening. No wind, no insects, no footsteps, just the memory of that whispered voice and the presence it left behind in the thick, unmoving air. She slowly lowered her flashlight to the square panel in the ground. It was covered in decades of moss and grime, but now that she was looking at it properly, she could see faint markings along its edges, circles and hash marks like old survey symbols, some of them overlapping like they'd been redrawn over time. It looked man-made but ancient, the kind of thing no county records ever mentioned. She dropped to one knee and dug her fingers into the groove, trying to pry it open. It wouldn't budge, not even a wiggle. She took a folding knife from her boot and jammed it into the seam, applying slow, deliberate pressure. The metal groaned under the strain, then shifted slightly with a hiss of escaping air. The scent that came up from below wasn't rot, it was something colder. A sterile, dry smell like concrete and static. She pressed her ear close. Silence. Then, faintly, a clink, like metal tapping metal, repeating every few seconds. Not knowing what she'd find, Lisa dropped a glow stick through the gap. It landed with a soft thunk, and illuminated a narrow tunnel descending below. The light flickered as it touched the bottom, barely revealing a metal floor and the shadow of a corridor stretching beyond it. Her first instinct was to radio for backup, but the signal bars on her receiver had dropped to zero the moment she opened the hatch. She had no connection, no signal, just the sound of her own breath. Lisa unhooked the rope from her pack 30 feet of reinforced climbing line and secured it to a nearby tree. As the wind began to stir above the treetops, she took one last look around the clearing. The forest stood still, watching. If this was a trap, it had waited a long time to be sprung. She tightened her gloves and lowered herself into the hatch. The descent was slow, the rope scraping softly against the tunnel walls. The interior was lined with smooth stone and reinforced metal braces. It didn't look like a bunker. It looked older, like something built to be sealed, not for keeping things out, but for keeping something in. When she reached the bottom, her boots landed on dry metal. Her flashlight caught the first glimpse of the hallway. It was narrower than she expected, barely wide enough to move with arms extended. The air down here was cold, unnaturally so, like the temperature had been preserved since the day the hatch was sealed. Then, echoing softly from the corridor ahead, she heard a voice. "Lisa, please, don't leave." It wasn't a whisper this time. It was clear, familiar, and unmistakably real. Jeremy Culver's voice. Lisa's fingers hovered near her holster. Not out of fear, but instinct. Jeremy's voice echoed softly down the corridor, bouncing off stone and metal like it had been trapped in there for decades, waiting for someone to hear it. Her heart pounded as she advanced slowly, sweeping her flashlight left and right. The beam revealed the passage was carved at perfect right angles, with walls that were too smooth to be natural. Someone had built this place deliberately, not recently and not hastily. It reminded her of old Cold War-era fallout shelters, but the design was older, more intricate, almost ceremonial. Every 10 feet, her light passed over recessed panels embedded into the wall. They resembled faded control units or forgotten intercom boxes. Some had knobs. Others had broken dials with indecipherable symbols etched into the rust. It was like walking through a maze, meant to be forgotten, or worse, erased. Then she noticed something else, tiny fingerprints on the wall. Dust-covered but recent. Child-sized, her flashlight traced them to a point where the corridor split, forming a T-junction. On the floor at the corner lay a small plastic toy, the kind you'd find at the bottom of a cereal box. A red dinosaur. She recognized it from one of the Culver family's photos. Lisa crouched beside it, turning the toy in her hand. It had no dust, no damage. It had been placed here recently, deliberately, a trail. Her pulse quickened as she looked to the right, where the corridor curved down into a deeper slope. A soft light flickered at the edge of the bend, not from her flashlight, but from something ahead, amber and steady, like the glow of an old filament bulb. As she approached, the sound of the tapping returned metal against metal, repeating with a rhythmic cadence. The corridor opened into a chamber. It wasn't large, but it was tall, with arched ceilings supported by narrow beams. In the center was a table, and on that table, surrounded by small objects, shoes, drawings, toys, sat an old relateral tape recorder. Its reels turned slowly, clicking each time they completed a full rotation, and sitting beside the machine was a chair. In it sat a young boy, Jeremy Culver. He looked exactly as he had in the 2002 family photos. Red hoodie, jeans, hair slightly overgrown and falling into his eyes. He didn't turn when she entered, just stared ahead at the far wall, lips parted slightly. Lisa stepped closer, quietly, as if any sound might cause him to vanish. "Jeremy," she whispered. He blinked but didn't turn. "Jeremy, do you know where you are?" He finally turned his head. His eyes met hers. "I think we never left," he said. And before Lisa could ask what he meant, another voice echoed from deeper in the tunnel behind him. A woman's voice, older. "Sarah, come here, sweetheart." Jeremy flinched. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Sarah Levinson was one of the other missing children from Hallowind Acres, gone just a month after the Culvers. But Lisa knew for certain. Sarah's voice shouldn't still be echoing, not unless they were all still here. Lisa took a cautious step forward, her heart pounding. Sarah's voice rang out again from the depths of the room, this time tinged with more urgency. It wasn't just a distant memory anymore. It was real, tangible. It was here. "Jeremy, listen to me," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. "Where are the others? Where is your mother and father?" She reached out to him, but he didn't move. Instead, he continued staring at the wall, his eyes empty, unblinking. "They never left," Jeremy repeated, his voice distant, as if he were reciting something learned by heart. "They're here too. They're waiting." Lisa's throat tightened. This wasn't right. Jeremy shouldn't be here. No one should. This entire setup felt wrong, as if something had been orchestrated to trap them all within this place, this forgotten underworld beneath Hallowind Acres. Something ancient, something purposeful. "Jeremy," Lisa pressed, stepping closer. "Please, look at me. You've been trapped here for 20 years. I'm here to get you out. We can go home, but..." The boy didn't respond. He didn't even blink. Lisa looked around the room, desperately searching for anything that might explain the scene in front of her. The table with the items, the reels of the recorder spinning on their own, they were all part of the ritual, weren't they? The quiet hum of the room, the eerie stillness, everything was trying to keep them locked in place. Suddenly, the lights flickered once more, and the machine emitted a soft worry sound. Another voice began to play from the recorder. It was barely audible at first, but Lisa's ears pricked up when she recognized the name. Greg Culver. Lillian Culver. The voice trailed off, distorted and faint. A man's voice, too faint to recognize, yet familiar. Greg Culver, Lisa repeated in her mind, the father of the Culver family. This tape had something to do with them. The same family that had been at the heart of the first disappearances in 2002. Could it be possible that they were still here, in some form? Her pulse quickened as she took another step forward, towards the table, towards the machine. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she hadn't yet understood, something she was overlooking. The air seemed to thicken, and her skin tingled with unease. Just as she was about to reach for the tape recorder, the voice spoke again, clearer this time, but still fragmented. "Come, we must... ... never leave." Lisa froze, her fingers inches from the machine. The voice, now recognizably Lillian Culver's voice, had said it again. But this time, it wasn't just a message. It was a command. She backed away, her feet crunching on the floor with every step. This wasn't just a memory. This was an active force, trying to bind her here with the rest of them, trying to keep them all in this endless loop of forgotten moments. But who or what was doing it, and why? Jeremy didn't move. but his eyes, his unblinking stare, followed her every motion. She reached the edge of the room, where the walls were lined with more strange symbols, and the heavy silence settled. Around her, Lisa. Jeremy's voice broke the silence, this time, a whisper that chilled her to the bone. She never wanted you to know. And then, without warning, the room went dark. The darkness was suffocating, the kind that pressed against your chest, making it feel as though the walls of the room were closing in on you. Lisa's breath quickened, and her flashlight flickered before cutting out completely. The faint hum from the reel-to-reel machine was now gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to vibrate in the air. She held her breath, straining to hear any sound, any movement. She had come too far to turn back now. With a shaky hand, she fumbled for her phone, but there was no signal, nothing. The absence of sound was almost deafening. Then, just as she was beginning to feel the weight of the place settle too heavily on her shoulders, a soft light began to flicker back to life in the distance. It wasn't bright, it was more like a low, amber glow, but it was enough for Lisa to make out shapes and shadows, to guide her footsteps. She turned cautiously toward the light, moving slowly, not sure if the figures that emerged from the darkness would be real or some kind of trick. Her mind was playing dot. As she approached the source of the light, she saw a small room off to the side. Inside, there was a single figure standing in front of what appeared to be another control panel, a large, bulky device covered in buttons and levers. The figure was silhouetted against the amber light, their back turned toward Lisa, but she could make out the outline of a woman. She didn't move. She didn't even seem to breathe. "Who's there?" Lisa called, her voice low and measured, trying to keep the rising panic at bay. The figure didn't respond, but Lisa's eyes focused more intently, and she saw something that made her freeze. On the wall behind the woman, scratched into the metal, were the same symbols that had been carved into the walls of the chamber she'd just left. Symbols that had also appeared in the photographs she'd studied in the case files, symbols that had never made sense until now. Lisa stepped closer, her feet making no sound on the floor. The woman still didn't turn, her hands placed firmly on the control panel in front of her, and as Lisa approached, she realized with a shock that the woman standing there was not someone from the missing families, not Lillian, not any of the others. It was Sarah Levinson, alive, standing right there. Lisa's heart skipped a beat as the woman finally turned, her face illuminated by the dim light. But instead of relief, Lisa felt a chill. Sarah's eyes were vacant, unblinking, as if she hadn't seen anyone for years, as though she had been living in this place in some suspended animation. "It's time," Sarah whispered in a hollow voice. "You shouldn't have come." Lisa took another step forward, the words freezing her in place. "What do you mean? You're alive. How are you alive?" Sarah didn't answer at first. She simply stepped back, pressing a hidden button on the side of the control panel. The walls trembled slightly, and the air seemed to grow colder. A soft, grinding sound echoed through the room, as if something ancient was awakening. Something deeper, buried beneath Hallowind Acres. "You don't understand," Sarah continued in that same eerie, flat tone. "None of us are truly gone. Not really." Before Lisa could respond, the entire room began to shake violently. The light from the panel flickered wildly as the walls rattled. She reached out, grabbing Sarah's arm to steady herself, but Sarah seemed to be beyond her reach, like she wasn't entirely there anymore. And then, in an instant, the lights went out again. The room was plunged into absolute darkness. Lisa felt a cold breeze brush past her, But Sarah was gone. Her breath came in short gasps as she tried to regain her bearings. What was this place? What had been kept here all these years? It wasn't just a secret, it was a trap, an ancient, forgotten experiment. And as the shaking subsided, Lisa realized with dawning horror that it wasn't just the Culvers or the Levinsons who were still trapped here. Everyone was. The air grew even colder. As Lisa stood alone in the dark, the weight of the realization pressing down on her chest, her heart raced, but she didn't move. She couldn't. She had just seen Sarah Levinson, or someone who looked like her, trapped in a state that defied everything Lisa had come to believe. A ghost, a person frozen in time. It wasn't just Sarah. Lisa now understood that the people who had vanished were still here. Somehow, they had been kept, preserved, or hidden beneath the very land where their lives had once unfolded. Her flashlight flickered back to life, illuminating the same cold stone walls she had passed earlier. The symbols that had been etched into the stone were now more apparent, covering every inch of the tunnel like some forgotten language. As she took another cautious step forward, she noticed something else, the faintest traces of old bloodstains. Along the floor, these were not fresh. They had been there for years, decades. She knelt down, touching the cool surface of the floor where the stains were the darkest, as if something or someone had been dragged here. The passageway ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, a corridor of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Lisa knew that if she went deeper into the tunnels beneath Hallowind Acres, she would have to confront what had kept these people, these families, alive or imprisoned for so long. The sheer impossibility of it was overwhelming, but she had already come too far. She had seen too much to turn back now. She followed the path, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. With each step, the silence around her grew more profound. It was a silence that felt unnatural, almost alive. The walls seemed to close in as though they were watching, waiting for her to make the next move. Her flashlight swept across the floor, catching on a strange set of markings near the end of the passage. These symbols were different, more intricate, like an elaborate script. Lisa crouched down and studied them, her fingers tracing the edges of the glyphs. They resembled a ritualistic language, something ancient, a language that might have been used to keep them locked in this place. Lisa's eyes widened as the pieces began to fall into place. These symbols weren't just warnings. They were instructions, guides to keep the ritual alive, to keep these lost souls tethered to the earth, unable to move on. She looked back, her mind racing. The disappearances weren't just random, they were intentional. And the people trapped in this place, they weren't victims. They were part of something larger, something that had been set in motion long ago. Suddenly, the silence was broken. A soft worry sound rose from the darkness ahead, followed by the mechanical creak of something large moving. Lisa's heartbeat quickened. She wasn't alone. There was someone else in the shadows, watching her every step. The light from her flashlight caught something at the end of the corridor. A large door, heavy and imposing, covered in the same cryptic symbols. The worry sound grew louder, and the door slowly, almost reluctantly, creaked open. Lisa stepped forward, unsure of what she would find. As the door swung open, the faintest scent of incense and old wood wafted through the air. Her flashlight illuminated a circular chamber, the walls lined with stone shelves holding strange, ancient objects. Jars filled with liquid, crumbling books, and what looked like pieces of old, forgotten technology. But in the center of the room, there was a raised platform, a kind of altar, and on that altar lay a figure covered in a thin sheet. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. She could hardly bring herself to look, but she had to know. She had to understand what had happened here. The sheet shifted, and beneath it, she saw the face of someone she knew, someone she had seen in the missing persons reports. It was Lillian Culver, her eyes closed as if sleeping, yet impossibly unchanged, her face untouched by time. It was not just the Culvers or the Levinsons. Every missing family was here. They had never left. Lisa staggered back, her hand clutching her chest as she fought to regain her composure. Lillian Culver, her face so perfectly preserved, as though she had just been placed there moments ago, stared back at her, untouched by time. The rest of the room seemed to pulse with an energy she couldn't comprehend. The air was dense, heavy with an atmosphere that felt simultaneously ancient and alive. As Lisa stood there, staring at the woman who had been missing for 20 years, a wave of nausea washed over her. This was no ordinary disappearance. Lillian, like the others, was not dead, she was trapped. The figures on the stone shelves around the room, silhouettes half hidden beneath thick layers of dust, weren't just objects of memory. They were part of a much larger, much darker puzzle. It wasn't just the bodies of the missing people. It was their consciousness, their essence, that had been kept here. Lisa's head spun. How? Why? She couldn't bring herself to touch Lillian's form, but her fingers trembled as she brushed against the edge of the sheet. No one had aged. The people of Hallowind Acres, whose families had disappeared into thin air 2 decades ago, had not been lost to time. They had been kept here, suspended in this impossible space. This was no accident, it was a plan. Behind her, the door creaked as if someone had entered, but Lisa didn't turn. The cold was too thick. The mystery was suffocating. She knew there was something important about this room, something she had to understand before it was too late. If there were answers to the questions that haunted Hallowind Acres, they lay here. She could feel it. It was never meant to be discovered. A voice whispered from behind her. The voice was soft, echoing through the chamber like it had been there for years, waiting to speak. Lisa turned sharply, but no one was there. The figure on the altar stirred, and a strange low hum filled the room. Lisa's eyes widened in terror, her mind scrambling for answers. Was it Lillian speaking? Was this what she had been waiting for? She stepped forward, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The light flickered and then settled on a series of old symbols etched into the walls. They were the same as the ones she had seen before, the ones that had connected the missing families. This was a ritual, a binding, a containment. The families weren't just lost. They had been chosen for something. The true horror, Lisa realized, was that this had never been a case of disappearance. The town had been feeding on them, trapping them in this forgotten place beneath the earth. And as she stood there, the weight of it settling over her like an invisible hand, she understood the worst part. The ritual wasn't finished. It was still ongoing. It had never stopped. She was being watched, not just by the shadows around her, but by the people in this very room, the ones who had been trapped in time, frozen but aware, and they were waiting for the moment when the cycle would continue again. The walls of the chamber seemed to close in on Lisa, the air growing heavier with every second. She stood motionless, the cold sweat creeping down her back, the faint hum of an unseen mechanism vibrating through the floor beneath her feet. Her mind raced, trying to process the gravity of what she had just uncovered. The missing families were not lost. They were contained, preserved by an ancient ritual that had kept them trapped, suspended in time. But why? What had this town done to them? What was the true purpose behind the ritual that had been cast on? Hallowind Acres. Lisa turned back to Lillian Culver, whose face remained as still as death, yet her eyes were different. The vacant expression that had been there moments before had changed, almost imperceptibly, like the slightest flicker of awareness. It was as if Lillian had heard Lisa's thoughts. It made Lisa's heart race. Could Lillian understand what was happening? Could any of them? The room felt alive with a presence, though the figure on the altar had yet to move. Lisa knew that she had to understand what had kept these families in stasis, and what role she played in all of this. She couldn't leave until she had answers, until she could bring this nightmare into the light and put an end to it once and for all. As she examined the room further, her gaze fell on the walls once again. The symbols that decorated the stone were not random. They formed intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with a rhythmic energy, almost like a heartbeat. Lisa knelt down beside a nearby shelf, where a dusty old journal lay, its pages yellowed and fragile with age. The cover was marked with the same symbols, faded but still visible. The journal was a relic, its edges worn from use. She picked it up carefully, praying it wasn't too fragile to open. The first page was written in an elegant yet hurried hand. The ritual must continue, for the town, for the land, for the ones we lost. The gate will open when the stars align, and when the time is right. Lisa's hands trembled as she read the words aloud. The gate, what gate? And why was it so important? For the ritual to continue. She flipped through the pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. The town, the families, they weren't victims of a random event. They were pawns in a plan much older than the town itself. A plan that had been set into motion generations ago. A plan to feed something else, something that lay beneath Hallowind Acres, waiting for the cycle to complete. As Lisa read on, the journal revealed more. It described how the town had been built on land that was ancient, long forgotten by most. The original settlers had made a pact with something older than them, a force tied to the earth, the stars, and the unseen. In exchange for prosperity, the town would offer up sacrifices, people whose lives were tied to the land and to the forest, drawn in and then held. The ritual was designed to ensure the town's survival, to keep the land fertile and prosperous. Lisa closed the journal slowly, the weight of its contents sinking in. The Culvers, the Levinsons, the Grants, they were never meant to leave. They had been part of a larger, horrifying cycle, and now, as the ritual neared its completion, the town of Hallowind Acres would once again demand its toll. Her breath hitched. The cycle hadn't ended. It had only been interrupted. She looked back at the altar. The flickering light from the old machine cast long shadows across the room. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with life, responding to the knowledge she had just uncovered. The air was thick, as though something was drawing nearer, something that had been waiting for her to uncover the truth. She felt it then, the presence that had been watching her. The room was no longer empty. Something was moving behind her. The cold rush of air hit Lisa's back, sending a shiver down her spine. Her breath caught in her throat as she spun around, her flashlight sweeping the shadows, trying to catch whatever had shifted behind her. The chamber, once still and silent, seemed to pulse with a new, sinister energy. The shadows were deeper now, stretching longer than before. They reached toward her, creeping along the walls like they had a mind of their own. Her flashlight flickered again, then cut out entirely. In the deep darkness, Lisa's heart hammered in her chest. She reached for her backup flashlight, but before she could grab it, she heard a voice, a low murmur, barely a whisper. You shouldn't have come here. Lisa's body went rigid as the voice echoed through the chamber, and she immediately recognized it. It wasn't just one voice, it was many, blending together in a chorus of muted, hollow tones. 1,000 whispers, all speaking at once, reverberating through the stone walls. Rising from the very ground beneath her feet, we never left. They chanted in unison, a rhythm that seemed to bind the words together. The room felt colder, and the hairs on Lisa's neck stood up. She backed away from the altar, her eyes darting around in search of any movement, anything that would explain the voices. Her breath was ragged, and she could feel her pulse quicken with each passing second. There was no escape. Not from this. Not from the dark truth that had kept these families trapped in this cursed ritual. The floor beneath her feet began to vibrate. The vibrations were subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but then they grew stronger until the entire room seemed to shake. She glanced at the altar again, and it was then that she saw it, the shape of a figure rising from the shadows. Slowly, deliberately. It wasn't just a reflection of the past, it was real. A form, tall and thin, standing at the far end of the chamber, hidden in the darkness. It was humanoid, but there was something unsettling about the way it moved. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, and Lisa could feel her heart race as it slowly turned toward her. You shouldn't have come here, it repeated, its voice now more distinct, but still filled with that same eerie distortion. The figure stepped forward. Lisa's breath hitched as her mind raced. This was no ghost. This wasn't some figment of her imagination. This was the source of it all. The thing that had kept Hallowind Acres in its grip for decades. And it had been waiting for her. With every instinct screaming at her to run, Lisa's body froze. The thing in front of her was not just tied to the land. It was the land, the force, that had trapped the families of Hallowind Acres in the endless cycle. It was more than a monster. It was the very heart of the curse. The reason the people had never left. The figure took another step forward, and as it did, the ground beneath Lisa's feet seemed to give way. A faint crack appeared in the stone floor, glowing with the same amber light that had filled the chamber moments earlier. The walls trembled with the force of something ancient stirring deep beneath them. The whispers grew louder, the words clearer, more urgent now. It's time, they whispered. Time for the gate to open. Lisa's mind raced. The gate, the ritual, the cycle had never been broken. The gate had never been shut. It was always meant to open again. She realized, with dawning horror, that the figure wasn't just speaking. To her, it was speaking to all of them. The trapped souls, the families, the children. This was their moment. This was the moment they had been waiting for, and Lisa was part of it now. The room seemed to stretch before Lisa, the shadows shifting and swarming like living creatures. Her legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the ground with every step she took. She didn't know why she stayed still. Every fiber of her being told her to run, to escape this nightmare. But deep down, she knew something had changed. She wasn't just a witness to this horror anymore. She had been pulled into it, whether she wanted to be or not. The figure before her, tall, thin, and utterly alien, continued to move toward her with deliberate slowness. Its limbs twitched at odd angles, like they weren't quite connected to its body. It was no longer a mere shadow in the dark. It was a force, a presence, and with every step it took, the air grew heavier, denser, until Lisa could feel the pressure, pressing against her chest. The whispers that had filled the room earlier grew louder, converging into a single, unified chant. The voices of the lost, the Culvers, the Levinsons, the Grants echoed in unison. It's time. The gate must open. They weren't just repeating words anymore. They were calling to something, summoning it. Something was waking. Lisa's pulse quickened. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the amber light surrounding the altar pulsed in rhythm with the voices. It was all connected. The gate, the ritual, the people trapped in this place. They had been waiting for someone to awaken the ritual, and now that it had been stirred, it couldn't be stopped. But what was this gate? The realization hit Lisa like a jolt of electricity. The gate wasn't just a physical entrance. It was a barrier between the living and the dead, between the world as she knew it and whatever realm had been pulling these people in for generations. The ritual had created a door that was never fully closed, a doorway between the forest, the town, and something older, more dangerous. The figure reached out toward her, its long fingers stretching impossibly far. Lisa stumbled back, but before she could react, a sharp pain shot through her chest, as though the very air around her had turned solid. Her vision blurred, and the world spun wildly. She gasped for air, but there was none to be had. It was as if the room was closing in on her, the walls bending and distorting around her. The symbols on the walls flared to life, glowing brighter, illuminating the figure in front of her. The strange, rhythmic chant of the voices rose to a crescendo, and the amber light flooded the room. In that moment, Lisa saw at the gate. It wasn't just a door in the traditional sense. It was an opening, a crack in reality itself, appearing. In the center of the room, the gate was pulsing now, its edges flickering like the light of a dying fire. It was as if the fabric of the world itself was beginning to tear. "Lisa," the voice whispered again, this time clear as day. "Come with us." Lisa's chest heaved. The figure's face came into focus, Lillian Culver's face, her expression locked in that same eerie, vacant stare. But her eyes, they were different now. There was recognition there, recognition that Lisa had been part of this, that she had been marked, that she had entered this place with a purpose. The gate wasn't just for the missing, it was for Lisa too. She had awakened it. She had unlocked it. And now there was no turning back. Whatever was waiting beyond that tear in the world was pulling at her, trying to claim her. She could feel it tugging at her very soul. "There is no escape," the voice whispered. The gate pulsed again, and the room seemed to warp around her. The temperature dropped, and Lisa's breath came out in visible clouds. The floor cracked beneath her feet, and she was thrust forward, closer to the swirling light. She had to make a choice. Lisa's body trembled as the pull of the gate grew stronger, an invisible force yanking her toward the glowing vortex. Her breath came in sharp gasps, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the crack in reality, widening before her. The voices, no longer just whispers, rose in a deafening chorus, chanting her name, pulling her toward the light. It wasn't just the gate itself. It was the weight of the years, the ritual that had been unfinished for so long, waiting for someone to break the seal. Now it had chosen her. Lisa, Lillian Culver's voice echoed again, soft and eerie, but it was full of something else. Now something darker. "You are part of this. You've always been part of this." Her chest tightened. Part of this. The words rang in her mind like a hammer striking an anvil. She wasn't just an observer. She had come here for a reason. She had found the tape. She had followed the clues. She had unlocked the door. The gate wasn't just pulling her toward it was pulling her into the cycle. She was marked now. She had stepped into their world, and there was no way to return to what had been. No, Lisa whispered, shaking her head, her body stiff with fear. I won't be part of this. You're not real. But Lillian's form shimmered before her, the figure rising from the altar. Her hollow eyes locked on Lisa's. We were never gone, Lisa. We've been waiting for you. Her voice broke into a low, mournful hum as the edges of her form blurred, merging with the glowing light. The town can't survive without the gate, without the ritual. The words felt like ice in Lisa's veins. She didn't know how long she stood there, rooted to the spot, her mind screaming at her to escape, to run. But the gate was pulling at her, a force more powerful than her will to resist. The whispers, the chanting filled the room. Come, come. It was not just a command, it was a compulsion. Her body moved on its own, drawn forward by the swirling light. The scent of incense and damp earth filled her lungs, and the world around her began to fade. The figure in front of her vanished into the amber glow, but Lisa's mind was still there, still fighting. She wasn't a part of this. She refused to be part of whatever twisted ritual had taken place under Hallowind Acres. She had to find a way to stop it. She had to close the gate before it was too late. Lisa's mind screamed one last time for her to fight it, and somehow, some part of her responded. She stumbled backward, her hand reaching out toward the nearest wall to steady herself. Her fingers brushed against the cold stone, and in that instant, the room's pulse faltered. The light from the gate dimmed just slightly, flickering, as though it was losing its grip on her. That was it. The moment of weakness. The gate's power was tied to the ritual, the cycle of those who had been trapped. And Lisa, for all her fear and confusion, had become its final key. With a surge of adrenaline, Lisa slammed her hand against the wall, pressing against the symbols that marked the entrance. The faint hum of energy beneath her fingers grew louder as she began to push against the stone, as if trying to force the gate back into its place. No more sacrifices, no more traps. The voices screamed, their unified cry rising to a maddening crescendo. But Lisa pushed harder, her mind focusing on one thought. I will end this. And then, in a flash, the world shifted. The gate pulsed violently, then collapsed, the light flickering out like a dying star. The voices fell silent, as though the air had been sucked from the room. The room, which had once seemed so full of life, now felt empty, hollow, as if a presence had been drained from it. The weight, the pressure, lifted. Lisa collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The floor beneath her feet cracked, then settled into stillness. The chanting, the voices, were gone. The gate had closed. Lisa looked around the chamber, half expecting it to reopen, half expecting the voices to return. But there was only silence, a long, heavy silence that seemed to fill every corner of the room. She could feel her heart pounding, but she knew she had done it. She had stopped the cycle. She had closed the gate, severed the connection. Hallowind Acres, and the families who had been trapped there, would finally be free. But as she stood up, shaky and disoriented, the last whisper of the voices caught her ear, faint but unmistakable. It's not over. The words lingered in Lisa's ears long after the silence had returned to the chamber. It's not over. The phrase echoed in her mind, like a warning she couldn't shake. She had just freed the trapped souls of Hallowind Acres, or so she believed. The gate had closed. The ritual halted. The darkness that had hung over the town for years should have been lifted. But there was something in the air. something she couldn't place that told her the battle wasn't finished. Lisa stood motionless in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the now still objects and shelves of forgotten items. The ancient machine beside her was silent, the once grating hum completely gone. She breathed deeply, letting the weight of what she had just done settle on her shoulders. The ground beneath her feet felt solid again, as if the very foundation of the place had been released from its burden. Yet, despite the calm, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Turning back toward the altar, Lisa's eyes scanned the room one last time. She had expected to find peace. What she found instead was a question and nagging doubt that crept into her thoughts like a shadow. She had closed the gate, but was it truly closed? Or had she merely interrupted the cycle, momentarily disturbing something far greater? She took a few shaky steps toward the altar, now empty. The coldness in the room had faded, but the energy was still there, an undertone of something ancient and powerful. Something not quite finished. A realization hit Lisa, sharp and sudden. She hadn't just broken the cycle, she had momentarily stopped it. But stopping wasn't the same as breaking it. The ritual had existed for far too long, tied to something far older than the town. She hadn't erased it, she had merely delayed it. Behind her, she heard the soft sound of footsteps. Lisa spun around, expecting to see another figure, but the chamber remained empty. Her flashlight flickered. The door that led to the tunnel she had descended from remained closed. No one had entered the room. No one but the force she had set in motion. Lisa's hands trembled as she grabbed the journal from the table where she had left it earlier. She quickly flipped through the pages, searching for any mention of an escape from the cycle, anything that could confirm her suspicion that the ritual was still waiting for the right time to rise again. Her heart skipped a beat when her eyes landed on a passage she had missed earlier. The gate will open when the land remembers. The land will remember when the earth is called, and when the stars align, the cycle will be complete. No force can stop it. It is written. She stopped, her finger pressed against the final line of the passage. The words hung in the air, their meaning sinking in like cold steel. The ritual wasn't just tied to the families who had been taken. It was tied to the very land, to the forest that surrounded Hallowind Acres. It was a cycle that had been written into the earth itself. Lisa suddenly realized that the land had never forgotten. It had been waiting, patient, for the right moment to awaken. And the ritual, for all her efforts to stop it, could never truly be broken, only delayed. It wasn't over. The cycle would return. A chill ran down her spine as the sound of distant whispers crept back into the room. The gate may have closed for now, but the land would remember. It always did. The room grew colder again, the air thick with the same presence that had filled it when Lisa first arrived. The whispers began softly, like the rustling of leaves in a distant wind, but they grew louder, more distinct, until they were almost deafening. Lisa's heart raced in her chest, and she could feel the weight of something pressing down on her, an invisible force, pulling her toward the center of the room where the altar stood, where the ritual had first begun. She staggered back, her hands gripping the edges of the stone table, as if it could anchor her to the present, to the reality she knew. But she knew, deep down, that the reality she had come to understand was slipping away. The land, the ritual, it was coming back. The gate had been sealed, but Lisa had unwittingly opened something else. The cycle hadn't been stopped. It had only been paused. The whispers grew clearer, and now they sounded like voices she recognized. names she had heard in the files. The people who had vanished from Hallowind Acres: Lillian Culver, Sarah Levinson, Greg Culver, the missing children. They were speaking, chanting, calling from somewhere deep beneath the earth, their voices stretching out beyond the walls of the chamber. Their words were unintelligible, but the tone desperate, mournful, and filled with longing was unmistakable. Lisa's eyes darted around the room, and then she saw it. The symbols on the walls, which had been dormant, began to glow again, faintly at first, but growing brighter with each passing second. The amber light from the altar pulsed like a heartbeat, matching the rhythm of the voices. The land was remembering. The ritual was awakening. Lisa stepped back, the overwhelming realization settling in her gut. She had misunderstood everything. The cycle wasn't just about the families who had disappeared, it was about the land itself. The town, the forest, the soil beneath her feet. It was all part of the ritual, a force beyond human comprehension. The land needed the cycle to continue, to feed it, to keep it alive, and now, the land was calling again. The temperature dropped, and Lisa shivered as the whispers reached a fever pitch, swirling around her like a storm. The walls shook, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. She could hear something deeper, stirring in the dark, like a great beast awakening after a long slumber. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way to stop it, but there was no stopping it now. The land had been waiting. It had never forgotten. In the center of the room, the amber light from the altar flared brighter, illuminating the stone floor beneath it. Lisa gasped as the ground cracked open, revealing a swirling vortex of light and shadow beneath her feet. It was the gate. It was opening again, but this time, it wasn't just a passage between worlds. It was a doorway to the land itself, a gateway that had been sealed for decades, waiting for someone to unearth it. Lisa backed away, but the ground beneath her feet gave way, and she was pulled toward the swirling vortex. Her fingers scrambled to grip the edges of the altar, but it was no use. The force was too strong. She felt herself being dragged closer to the center of the room, where the gate pulsed with an unnatural power. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the swirling energy around her. The voices grew louder, now chanting her name. Lisa, ... come. Her vision blurred as the light engulfed her, pulling her into its depths. She had no choice now but to surrender to it. The cycle was not over. The land had claimed her, just as it had claimed the others. And as she disappeared into the vortex, she understood this was never just about the families who vanished. It was always about the land. The ritual had begun long before the first disappearance, and it would continue. Long after, the gate would open again, and the cycle would repeat. Lisa's world spun as she was pulled into the vortex, the swirling light and shadows consuming her senses, the voices of the lost, the families, the children, once distant whispers, grew louder until they reverberated inside her skull. Their chanting, now a deafening cacophony, filled every crevice of her mind, urging her to join them, to become one with the land. In that moment, Lisa felt like she was being torn apart, her very essence being drawn into the earth, into the ritual, into something beyond comprehension. She had known the gate was powerful, but she had never imagined it could be so unencompassing. It was a force that went beyond the town, beyond the ritual itself. It was tied to the land itself, to the bones of the earth, to the very foundation of existence. And it needed someone from the outside to continue the cycle. The light that had consumed her began to fade, and she found herself standing in a vast dark expanse. The ground beneath her feet was soft, like wet clay, and the air was thick with an oppressive stillness. She could no longer hear the voices, but their presence lingered, pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't escape. She turned slowly, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and saw what stood before her. It was a door, an ancient weathered door, standing tall in the center of the vast void. The same symbols that had adorned the walls of the chamber in Hallowind Acres were etched into the door, glowing faintly with an eerie light. The door was the key. It was the portal between the land and whatever lay beyond, between the living and the dead, between the past and the future. Before she could take another step, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light. It was a woman, but her features were indistinct, blurred by time and shadow. Her form seemed to shift and waver like smoke, but Lisa could feel the weight of her presence. She knew this figure. It was her, the figure who had been watching over Hallowind Acres all these years. The one who had orchestrated the ritual. "You shouldn't have come," the woman said, her voice echoing through the void. It was a voice that Lisa recognized, though it felt foreign. Lillian Culver's voice. But it was no longer Lillian. It was something more. Lisa's pulse quickened. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, as the woman stepped closer, her form solidifying. Her eyes were empty, hollow. Nothing was behind them, but Lisa knew that something had always been there. The presence had been with her all along, feeding off her fear. Guiding her here, the figure stretched out a hand toward Lisa, as if beckoning her to come closer. The symbols on the door grew brighter, the light pulsing in rhythm with the woman's outstretched hand. "It is time," the figure intoned. "You were always meant to be part of this. You are part of the land now." Lisa felt her heart race as her body involuntarily moved toward the woman, toward the door. The land was calling her. She could feel it in her bones, in her veins, in her very soul. She had tried to stop it. She had fought to free the families, to break the cycle. But in the end, it wasn't just about them. It was about the land itself. And the land never forgets. As she reached the door, the woman's voice rang out again. Louder, more commanding. The cycle must continue. There is no breaking it, only passing it on. The door creaked open, revealing a blinding light beyond. And Lisa knew that whatever lay beyond the door was the beginning of something far darker. She wasn't just trapped in the cycle. She was now the cycle. The land had claimed her, and it would never let her go. And as she stepped forward, into the light, she felt the weight of the land pressing against her, pulling her into its depths. The door slammed shut behind her. The door slammed shut with a deafening crash, the sound reverberating through Lisa's chest like a heartbeat. But as the darkness swallowed her whole, Lisa realized that she wasn't falling into oblivion. The ground beneath her feet was solid, and the air, though thick with tension, was not suffocating. In fact, it felt ... familiar. The damp, cool atmosphere around her had the smell of the forest, of earth and decay, as though she had never truly left Hallowind Acres, as though the land had always been waiting for her. And then the light flickered. It wasn't a bright light, but more of an amber glow that illuminated the space around her, casting long, eerie shadows against walls that seemed to pulse with life. Slowly, Lisa's surroundings began to take shape. She found herself standing in the center of a cavernous chamber, its ceiling lost to shadow, its walls lined with what looked like thick, twisted vines of ancient roots, the same symbols from the ritual, now glowing softly beneath the surface. The pulse in the room wasn't just a figment of her imagination, it was alive, humming in the air, and Lisa could feel it thrumming beneath her feet. Deep in the earth itself, the woman, the figure she had seen before, now fully formed, stood in front of her. She was no longer just a shadow. Her features were sharp, her eyes black voids, endless and all-knowing. But there was something else in her presence, something older, darker, like a memory that refused to fade. "You're the keeper," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling with realization. The figure nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to echo with the weight of centuries. "I have always been," the keeper replied, her voice resonating with an eerie calmness. "And so, now you are. You've become part of it all. Lisa, you've become part of the land." The weight of her words settled over Lisa like a cloak. The keeper didn't need to explain more. Lisa understood now. The ritual, the land, the forest, everything was tied together. The ritual wasn't just about sacrifices. It was about the balance of the land, the cyclical nature of life and death, of the living and the forgotten. And now Lisa had crossed the line between them. She had awakened something older, something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. "I didn't mean to," Lisa said, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to help them. The missing families. They deserve to be free." "They were never meant to be free," the keeper answered, her voice low and almost sympathetic. "They were the ones who kept it alive. And now, so will you. It is a cycle that must continue, or the land will wither. Hallowind Acres is a vessel, and those who live here, those who are tied to it, are its caretakers." Lisa's stomach churned. She felt the overwhelming weight of what the keeper was saying, the truth she hadn't wanted to hear. The families, the missing people, were never meant to escape. They were tied to the land in ways that Lisa was just beginning to understand. They were the gatekeepers, the ones who held the balance in place. And now, Lisa had taken their place. "No," Lisa whispered, shaking her head. "I won't become like them. I won't." But as she stepped back, trying to find some escape, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The roots in the walls seemed to reach toward her, their thick tendrils curling like fingers, pulling her into the center of the room. The light grew brighter, the symbols on the walls pulsing faster, and the hum of the ritual grew louder in her ears. She was being drawn in, her feet no longer able to resist. The keeper's voice echoed around her. "It's too late, Lisa. The land remembers, and you are now part of it. The cycle is complete." Lisa fought against the pull, her hands clawing at the roots that surrounded her, but they only tightened their grip. Her body was frozen, held in place by the power of the land, by the ritual that had been waiting for someone to return and finish. You can't stop it," the keeper said softly. "You can't change the rules of the land." Lisa's breath came in shallow gasps as the world around her shifted, as the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred. She could feel the presence of the families, the Culvers, the Levinsons, the Grants, all of them surrounding her, their eyes empty but aware. They were watching her, waiting, and as the chamber filled with their voices again, she understood the true cost of her actions. She wasn't just closing the door. She was becoming the door. Lisa's body trembled as the roots tightened around her, their cold, sinewy grip pulling her deeper into the heart of the ritual. The chamber seemed to shift, the walls stretching and contorting with the movement of the land, as though the earth itself were breathing beneath her feet. The amber light from the glowing symbols flickered faster, each pulse quickening with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She tried to fight, tried to scream, but her voice was drowned out by the ever-growing hum, the ancient force that was feeding off the land and feeding off her. She couldn't break free. The land had claimed her, and now she understood the full weight of her actions. The gate was never truly closed. It had been waiting for someone to awaken it, to unlock it, to finish the cycle. And now that Lisa had stepped into it, she couldn't step back out. Not unless she embraced the truth of what this place was. Not unless she became the very thing she feared. "You can't escape it," the keeper said again, her voice now almost gentle, as if offering Lisa a final comfort. The figure hovered just beyond Lisa's reach, watching her struggle with a quiet, knowing expression. "This is your legacy now. This is the price of breaking the cycle. You are the cycle." Lisa's heart thudded painfully in her chest. The keeper's words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't understand them, not completely. She had stopped the ritual. She had freed the families from the land's grasp. Or had she? Was this just another part of the ritual? Had she never really broken it? Had she merely played her role in a cycle too old, too powerful to be undone? The voices around her, the missing, began to rise, their whispers becoming clearer. As the world around Lisa darkened, they weren't angry. They were resigned. They were part of it, and so was she, Lisa. The voice of Jeremy Culver filled her mind, softer now, almost sorrowful. It's time to remember. Remember, she had tried to forget. She had tried to escape. She didn't want to remember. She didn't want to be part of whatever this was. But as her gaze flicked toward the ground, she saw them, the symbols, not just on the walls, but now under her feet, etched into the very earth beneath her. A map, a pattern. It wasn't just the land that held the ritual. It was the bloodline. It was the souls of those tied to Hallowind Acres, and Lisa had, unwittingly, become one of them. The roots around her began to loosen slightly, but they didn't release her. They were offering her something now, choice. A fleeting moment of clarity. The land wasn't asking her to stay. It was giving her an option. A chance to pass the cycle on to someone else, to be free of it. The figures in the shadows of the chamber, Lillian, Sarah, the others watched silently. Lisa could feel their gazes on her, not filled with anger, but understanding. They had been trapped, and now Lisa had the chance to decide. Would she take their place? Would she become part of the land, the keeper, the next cycle of sacrifice? Or would she try to break it, truly end it? In that moment, Lisa made her choice. She wouldn't become the keeper. She wouldn't feed the land, let the ritual continue, with a breath as deep as her last. She reached for the center of the chamber, where the light pulsed strongest. As her hand touched the ground, something shifted. The symbols on the floor flared brightly, then shattered, like glass breaking across the earth. The roots that had held her began to crack, their grip loosening. The energy in the room began to wane, the oppressive weight lifting, and then, as the light faded, a voice whispered to her once more, Jeremy's voice, but it was different now. It was no longer mournful. It was free. "Thank you." Lisa gasped as she stumbled backward, the roots pulling away entirely. The darkness that had consumed the chamber receded, and the land, for the first time in centuries, felt alive. The ritual was ending, and the cycle had truly been broken. The gate was gone. The land remembered, but this time it had been set free. Lisa stood in the heart of the chamber, breathless, as the final remnants of the ritual seemed to fade into the air. The light dimmed, leaving only the faint glow of the symbols on the walls, now cracked and fractured like old pottery. The oppressive hum that had filled the room was gone, replaced by an eerie, peaceful silence. For the first time, the land of Hallowind Acres was no longer watching, no longer waiting. It was just quiet. Her legs were unsteady, but Lisa didn't care. She had broken the cycle. The ritual that had held these families in bondage, that had trapped them for generations, had been destroyed. She had made the choice to free them, to free herself. And the weight of it was both overwhelming and liberating. Behind her, the darkness in the chamber was receding. The walls no longer pressing in, the shadows no longer whispering. Lisa turned to face the altar one final time. The figure of Lillian Culver, once trapped in the same ritual, now stood before her, not a ghost, not a spectre, but a presence, a memory that had been freed. Lillian's face was different now, no longer empty, no longer hollow, but peaceful, almost serene. She stepped toward Lisa, her movements slow and deliberate, but there was no hesitation in her eyes. There was gratitude. Recognition. You did it, Lillian whispered, her voice soft but filled with emotion. You freed us all. Lisa swallowed, hard, her chest tightening with emotion. She had saved them, but had she really saved herself? The land still held its secrets, still remembered everything that had happened, everything that had been. Was it truly over? Lillian placed a hand on Lisa's shoulder, steadying her. You are part of the land now, just as we were. But the difference is, you chose to leave. You chose to break the cycle. The weight of the words hit Lisa harder than she expected. She had chosen. She had chosen to break free of the land's grip. But would the land ever truly let her go? The answer came in the silence that followed. The land would always remember, just as it would remember the families who had been trapped here for so long. But now it would remember freedom as well. The land was no longer just a keeper of the ritual. It had been changed, and so had Lisa. We're free, Lisa said, her voice hoarse, but resolute. Lillian nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. We are, but the land Hallowind Acres, it will always be part of us. We won't forget, but we are no longer bound. The figures of the other missing families began to materialize around them. Greg Culver, the Levinsons, the Grants, each of them, now freed from the land's control. Their faces, once lost in time, now glowed with life, their expressions softening as they looked toward Lisa. The years of torment, of being trapped in the ritual, seemed to lift from them, like a dark fog being cleared by sunlight. But Lisa knew it wasn't over, not entirely. There was still the matter of what to do with the land. With Hallowind Acres, the land had been freed, yes, but it had its own history, its own cycle. The families would leave, but the town itself, what of it? What would happen to it now that the ritual had ended? I don't know what will happen next, Lisa said, looking around at the freed souls. But I'll make sure the story is told. I'll make sure the truth of Hallowind Acres is known. People deserve to know what happened here. Lillian's smile grew. You'll make sure they remember. And we'll make sure the land doesn't forget either. But it doesn't own us anymore. Lisa nodded, the weight in her chest finally lifting. The land could remember, but the cycle had been broken. The curse was over. The air around Lisa felt different now, lighter, freer. It was as though the land, for the first time in decades, could finally breathe. The tension that had clung to Hallowind Acres for so long, the eerie presence that had bound the people and the land together in an unending cycle, was gone. But even as the land's grip loosened, Lisa could still feel its weight, its memory, lingering in the spaces between breaths. The families who had been trapped here, Lillian, Culver, Greg, the Levinsons, the Grants, stood with her, no longer bound to the land, but still a part of it. Their faces were softer now, the weariness of years spent in stasis replaced by something else, peace, and yet Lisa knew that peace came at a price. The history of Hallowind Acres would never fade completely. The town would always be tied to the cycle, to the land's ancient ritual, but they had broken it. They had freed the land from its own prison. And now the rest of the world would know the truth. Lisa felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Lillian standing beside her, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something deeper, like a shared understanding. "You did more than save us," Lillian said softly. "You saved the land, the curse that bound us all. ... It's been broken. But now, the land will have to remember differently. It won't forget, but it won't trap anyone again, either." Lisa's throat tightened. But what happens to it now? What happens to Hallowind Acres? Lillian looked around the chamber, her gaze lingering on the now quiet altar, the swirling symbols, and the flickering light that had once held them all captive. "What happens here, Lisa, is up to you. It's a part of your story now, too. You freed us. You freed yourself. The land will remember, but you get to decide what comes next." The weight of Lillian's words sank into Lisa's chest. She did have a choice. The story of Hallowind Acres, of the families who had disappeared, was hers to tell. She could leave, walk away from this place, and never look back, or she could stay, see it through. But even more than that, Lisa had to ensure that this didn't happen again. She had to make sure the land's cycle, its curse, never found its way into another town, another family. She had to make sure the truth lived on, that those who had been lost to the land would never be forgotten. "You'll help, won't you?" Lisa asked, turning to the freed souls. "You'll make sure the truth is told, that the land doesn't pull anyone else into this?" Lillian nodded. "We will. We're not trapped anymore, but we'll carry this memory. With us, Hallowind Acres won't forget, and neither will we." Lisa turned away from the altar, her steps growing steadier, firmer. There was still work to be done. The families would need help reintegrating into the world outside, into a reality they had been cut off from for so long. But Lisa knew they weren't alone anymore. They had each other, and they had her. The town of Hallowind Acres, though changed forever, would remain a part of her, a reminder that the past could be broken, that the cycles of darkness could be stopped. But it was also a reminder that some histories would never fade. They would be carried in the memories of those who survived, those who remembered. Lisa took one last look at the chamber, the symbols on the walls now dimming, the land finally at rest. It was over. The ritual had ended, and in the stillness of the room, Lisa heard something else. The faintest sound, like a door opening far away. A new chapter had begun. Lisa stepped out of the chamber, her breath coming in slow, steady intervals, as if she were waking from a long, haunting dream. The air outside was cool and crisp, different from the heavy, stagnant atmosphere inside the underground chamber beneath Hallowind Acres. She squinted against the daylight as it filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. The forest, once a place of darkness and fear, now felt like an old, tired friend, resting after a long, violent storm. The land had shifted. She could feel it beneath her feet, a subtle, almost imperceptible change in the way the earth moved. Beneath her, it wasn't just the trees or the buildings that had changed. It was something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of Hallowind Acres. She had broken the cycle. She had freed the souls trapped here. But now she was faced with a new challenge: how to share the truth, how to make sure no one else fell into the trap that had nearly claimed her, that had claimed so many before her. Behind her, the people of the Culver family, the Levinsons and the Grants, stood, reunited, there, faces full of wonder and confusion as they took their first steps back into the world of the living. They were free, but their lives had been stolen for so many years, and now they had to learn to live again. The years they had lost could never be regained, and the world they remembered was no longer the same. But at least they had this, the chance, to rebuild, to move forward, to find some semblance of peace in the aftermath of the ritual. "You've done it," Lillian Culver said, her voice filled with both relief and a deep, quiet sadness. She walked toward Lisa, her gaze shifting from the town they had once called home to the forest that now surrounded them. "I don't think we'll ever fully understand what happened here, but we're free. And that's more than we ever expected." Lisa nodded, her throat tight. "I couldn't have done it without you, without all of you." But Lillian shook her head, her eyes dark with something deeper. "We couldn't have done it without you either. You've given us the chance to remember, and the chance to stop the land's hold." Lisa looked out at the trees, the long stretch of empty road leading to the remnants of the old town, the place where the land had kept them locked in time, bound by forces beyond their understanding. But now it was a place of choice, not just for the families who had been freed, but for the land itself. Lisa turned back to the town, the sun beginning to dip behind the trees. The town was still there, familiar, decaying, but still standing, and the truth, the secret buried deep beneath the soil, would finally be revealed. "The story will be told," Lisa said firmly. "I'll make sure of it. This can't happen again. Hallowind Acres won't just be another forgotten place. People have to know." Lillian placed a hand on Lisa's shoulder, offering her a faint smile. "We'll help. We'll make sure they know." The others gathered around, each of them wearing expressions of quiet resolve, ready to take on the challenge of returning to a world that had moved on without them. They had been brought back, yes, but it was not without its cost. There was still much to heal, much to reclaim. Their memories, their lives, had been torn apart by something they couldn't fully understand. But Lisa had given them the chance to understand and the chance to live again. Lisa took one last look at the town. It would never be the same, but that was okay. Nothing could undo the past, but they would move forward. The land would remember, but they would live as the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the land. Lisa felt the weight of the years lift from her shoulders. The ritual had ended, the cycle had broken, and in its place was the beginning of something new. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Storiosity, and share your favorite moment. This story in the comments below.